Hi everyone, Susan here from the Sacramento History Museum, coming to you live from the neighborhood of Alkali Flat here in Midtown Sacramento. Pause for a second, make sure you can hear me. If you wouldn't mind giving a thumbs up on the video so we can just confirm that our audio is working before I get too far into the talk here. So thumbs up. It's a beautiful day here in Sacramento. I think it's like 72. It's February. Oh, what a beautiful day for a neighborhood walk. So we're very lucky. All right, we see it. Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, so like I said, I'm standing in Alkali Flat neighborhood. Now, if we were to cross the street, this is 12th Street, we would actually be in Mansion Flat neighborhood. And we had a little bit of debate on where that line was, but I am looking at the street signs, and that side says Mansion Flat and this side says Alkali, so I was right. 12th Street is that divider, and we are on the west side of 12th Street, so we're going to be heading more into the neighborhood. But before we do, I wanted to point out this really beautiful building behind me right at the corner of 12th and F Street. If you can see it, it says S.H. Farley at the top there. And it has on the side, which when we're walking, you might be able to see a little bit better, the year 1891. This was a grocery store originally built in 1891 by Stephen H. Farley, who, fun fact, was from Wisconsin. So I also am from Wisconsin, so we have to include this one here because, you know, it's important. But I have a picture, which I just love too, of what this building originally looked like. So take a look at that here. And you can see that the facade, the sun kind of weird on it. There we go. The facade has remained the same even from 1891. And so I love that too because Stephen Farley, he was a son of an Irish immigrant, moved here to Sacramento, became a grocer, opened his grocery in 1891, and then walked away from it in 1910 because he went to work for one of the many breweries that were in Alkali Flat. So he didn't like end his business or anything. He just kind of walked away from it and became somebody else's grocery. But his name is still at the top of that. So he's sort of like immortalized now in Sacramento history because of the name and the facade that has remained for these 130 years, which I just think is really cool. So we're going to walk into the neighborhood a little bit more now and look at some of the beautiful houses. I'm going to tell you a little bit more history of it too. So come on down. Now, this is the oldest neighborhood in Sacramento, and we'll talk about why that is, okay? It's always been a really great mix of both wealthy citizens and working class citizens, neighborhood homes, but also businesses and industry. And so it's just got this incredible history to it that I'm going to try and do justice for the neighborhood now. Now, it has coexisted, their industry and neighborhood and citizens and different like classes of citizens have coexisted in this neighborhood from the beginning. But by 1900, parts of the area were almost solely industrial. The railroad came through. There was a lot of like mills, like grain mills, but also lumber mills. So for example, Burnett and Sons lumber mill exists here in Alkali Flat, and it still does. So that's kind of cool. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods. Now, if you want to turn and show off some of the beautiful houses across the street here, I don't have the history on all of these houses. I wish I did, but then we'd be here for the next like 4 hours, which is okay. We'll keep walking so this music isn't just in the background. But I love it. And if you remember when we were walking through Poverty Ridge, we looked at similar houses to this really pretty kind of bluish green one right here. It's got that turret type thing on the side. Perhaps you remember what type style of house that was. In case you don't, I'll let you know it's Queen Anne. Right? So Queen Anne style home there, but I just love all these houses. And again, I wish I had the history on all of them, but I'm picking out a couple special ones to kind of highlight on this one. But if you ever get a chance to come through this neighborhood on a beautiful day like today, you're going to see so much different architectural styles and just beauty here. So I highly recommend it. We're going to wait here just a second while there's a couple cars pulling out so we don't get run over, which is preferable, really. But other kind of larger things or like businesses in this area. There was some pretty large breweries. There was the mills, like I said. There was also the Crystal Cream and Butter Company, which we have their sign in the museum. So that's kind of cool. All right, just checking. We're good. Keep coming. Now, as more of these larger businesses came in, the type of houses and homes started to change in the neighborhood. And so the single family homes that are the ones that we are kind of seeing changed. And they became more multifamily homes, or they were broken up in certain ways to be more like apartments or things like that. And then the wealthier inhabitants into the 1900s, they ended up leaving this, going to some of those other neighborhoods that we've already talked about. So that this area became more middle-class homes, but that kind of makes sense because it had a lot of, crossing the street safely, it had a lot of industrial things, mills and things like that, that would make sense that the workers would live nearby and then go to their jobs. So it's just kind of changed over time, and we'll talk more about that. Now, we're going to go to the next house. We're picking out our safest route here. So we're going to go down just a little bit here to see one of the more iconic houses in this neighborhood. I think you're probably going to recognize it if you spent any time here. Again, we're on F Street, so if you get a chance, check it out. A lot of these houses are original, but they've gone through a lot of change over time. So what you're seeing today is after a lot of effort and a lot of redevelopment efforts, and just trying to take these beautiful houses and make them new again. So we're coming up on it here if you want to get a shot from afar, if you will. Isn't it so beautiful? This is the castle. Aptly named, or aptly nicknamed, I suppose I should say. It was built by Isaac Martin Hubbard. He actually helped with creating America's transcontinental telegraph, which is pretty awesome. He also built the first railroad bridge across the American River here in Sacramento, along with his father. And I'm not really sure the whole story on that, but I like to think like him and his dad just like went out and built this bridge, and it was amazing. But I don't know. He built this in 1856. Again, it's nicknamed the castle, as you can probably tell. We can walk by it so you can get maybe a closer look on all sides of it too. Right now it's this kind of beautiful blue and gray, but it is also broken up now into law offices. It is not a home anymore, it's offices. I have pictures here though of kind of what it was like in the 1970s when a lot of these redevelopment efforts went up. So here you can see this picture where it's just really dilapidated. There's no windows, it's boarded up, it went through a rough time, and somebody came and decided to love it a lot and made it back into what it is today. I also love it because it has one of the sort of iconic staircases that Sacramento is really well known for. This area, part of the reason why it's called Alkali Flat, and I'll get to that in a second, flooded a lot. And so a lot of the homes here have these staircases that go up to the main entrance of the house that appears to us to be on the second story. But that was just because Sacramento is so prone to flooding, and especially this area, that a lot of the houses you'll see around here have that kind of second story entrance instead, and have these really beautiful staircases that just give it like this kind of opulent look, actually. Now we're gonna go backtrack just a little bit, cross the street so you can see another pretty well-known house in this area. All of these are pretty original though. I don't think they had to be refurbished and whatnot, but they all have their own different story, and it's pretty incredible. Now this house off to our left, you can see from here, get a good view of it. It is in the Greek Revival style, architectural style, I suppose. And it was built by J. Neely Johnson. Now, I had to look up, I was like, J. Neely Johnson, what's his first name? What's the J stand for? And I love it because it's John. His name is John Johnson. And this is the house that he built in 1854. Now, let's talk a little bit about why that is an important year as we are safely crossing this street here. So, in 1852, a terrible fire went through Sacramento. It's known as the Great Conflagration. And most of the existing buildings in Sacramento, certainly in Old Sacramento, where we do a lot of these videos, were destroyed. This area was not, but it wasn't really built up yet, and there's a reason for that. We're going to cross the street and talk about that reason. All right. Okay, so this area, Alkali Flat, was sort of a tidal basin. It was very much prone to flooding because it was where sort of the confluence of the Sacramento and American rivers would flood over, but also was prone to what was going on in the Delta area. So it was just like kind of a flood tidal basin. It was an area of extreme importance, though, to the Nisenan people, the original inhabitants of this region, who they fished and they hunted and they had their homes here in this neighborhood. So after the Great Fire, though, of 1852, all of this changed. Here, let's turn around so you're looking at something more exciting than the road. Okay. Whoops. There we go. So in 1852, most of the buildings in Sacramento burned down, but this area was left pretty much untouched because it wasn't used for building purposes. And that was when a lot of these wealthier citizens of Sacramento came in and decided to build their homes here. So this one, for example, John Johnson, built this house in the Greek Revival form. He was the fourth governor of California, so he was a pretty influential person. Now this home now, I believe, is still a home. There are people that live in it, but I think it's like it's a multifamily home now. However, in the 1960s, so almost 100 years after it was built, it was an amazing 9 separate separate area apartment residence. So it went through a lot of changes itself, and I feel like it's a really good example of kind of the changes that Alkali Flat went through. So he built it here as this like opulent place. Eventually, of course, the wealthier citizens moved into different neighborhoods, but this neighborhood, adapted and changed with the times. And this is a really good example, right? 1960s, it's made into 9 different apartments, and now it's back into 2. I have, though, let me show you. I have pictures of this one too. This is all, by the way, from this book, Sacramento's Alkali Flat. So if this sort of thing interests you and you want to know more about the businesses, the people, the architecture, check out a book like this, because it's got a lot of great information that I take snippets from and put it into one of these talks. Now, right here, this is John Johnson himself, young guy. Again, he was the 4th governor of California. Below is his home, taken in 1936. And then here is the 1970s, when it was kind of more dilapidated, falling apart, and then it had a revival and was made new again. And of course it looks like this now. And from what I understand, in the 1960s, when it changed to a 9 apartment house, it had all sorts of code violations. It was not a super safe place to live, which is why it got changed around again. So yeah, just kind of an interesting history of this house, which is a great snapshot, I think, of the whole neighborhood too. So let's walk through this really beautiful park, which is named J. Neely Johnson for the house next to it. Pretty cool. Also, governor, so pretty easy to know why it's named this. It's a lovely park just kind of in between the neighborhood here. It's got a little community garden in it. We're going to go across the way there and go to another park that's in Alkali Flats. Now, like I said, this neighborhood is continually changing, or it has throughout history. But it did not get its name Alkali Flat until about the 1920s, actually. And like a lot of the neighborhoods in Sacramento, it got its name because of a nickname that just stuck, right? Behind me here is the lovely community garden, or little green space. I just love it. So by the 1920s, when that name really stuck, the neighborhood had changed from, again, the wealthy elite to more of a working class kind of neighborhood, which, again, makes sense given all the mills, all the factories, all the industry that was happening in the place. And there was a really high population of Irish and Mexican immigrants who called Alkali Flats home. And again, just try and pan. These are so beautiful. I just can't get over the beauty of this house. That greenhouse there has a wraparound porch, if you're able to see it. Yeah, I'm just in awe of the architecture. It's so good. So, what would happen when I was talking earlier about how this was kind of a tidal basin, what would happen is some of that water that would come in would be brackish water or partially salt water. It would come in, and when the water would recede from the floods or from different times of the year, it would leave behind this like chalky mineral white residue. And so it gave the nickname of this neighborhood Alkali Flat. But again, it didn't really stick until the 1920s, when there was actually a baseball team, an amateur baseball team, who named themselves the Alkali Flat Gang. And I guess that they had just really funny antics on the field. And so the name stuck after the baseball team named themselves that. Now, all around here, though, you can see the changes. We've got such a great juxtaposition here of those older kind of Victorian-ish style homes, more of a redevelopment like apartment buildings here. And then across the street, we have these like very modern townhomes. So this, again, is another snapshot of all that change that this neighborhood went through from being the oldest neighborhood where the wealthiest people live to being more of a working class neighborhood to having more industrial things. And then as we proceed more into the 1900s, how the changes happened. So what happened in, like I said, it got the name in the 1920s. By the late 1920s, 1930s, the United States was in the Great Depression, and this neighborhood suffered a lot from that. It was not a wealthy neighborhood at that point. And like most of the United States, it just had a really difficult time with during the Great Depression. So we're coming up here, though, on another building that was built between 1900 and 1915. And I really like it because it's right before the Depression, and it's a totally different style of building. It was built by Albert C. Hulsman, who was a saloon owner on J Street. And yeah, if you can get a shot of it from this corner here, you can see what I mean. It's just a totally different looking building. Let me show you here. Let's see, I think I have a picture of it. Yeah, it's like from this one's from the 1970s, so not like original, but you can see that it hasn't changed too much. Now, that kind of style of the arches there, that's called like a mix of Moorish style windows. And I have a picture here of different kinds of Moorish style windows. So you can see all of those would be considered Moorish style. That one's more in this top left style, I think. But what that means essentially is that it's very elaborate ornamentation, and I mean, it's just totally different than some of the other architectural things around here. And I bike down this street a lot, and I always see this, and I love how this is totally different than everything around it. Now we're going to cross the street and talk a little bit more about what happened after the Great Depression hit. That was really when a lot of these older buildings started to fall into disrepair, started to be turned into multifamily homes, and like just different kind of housing was built in this area. The housing in this area also became really cheap, and so like apartment buildings were easily built and then rented out, and so a lot of the changes happened during that time, kind of in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s in there. So some of the newer homes that look newer to us was probably built still pretty old or a pretty long time ago. So we're going to come up here on Tapata Park. It's across the street, but we'll see if we can get a good view of it or not. I'm not sure, because we're going to end on this side of the street, so if we need to cross, we can. But let's just see. Yeah. Maybe we can quickly cross and just see if we can get some good view, or just right here. Yeah, this is probably fine right here. I don't have too much to go over Zapata. But across the street in that green area, there is a lovely park. It's called Tapata Park, after Emiliano Zapata, who was a Mexican revolutionary. Now, this makes sense because because there's a lot of, like I said earlier, Irish Mexican immigrants lived here, but then the Royal Chicano Air Force came and had a great influence in this neighborhood. You'll see a lot of murals, and I think maybe that work that you see across the street is part of their artistic influence in the neighborhood too. So it was a gift from the Mexican government or that kind of gifted. There's a statue there of Emilio Zapata, and so this kind of sister city that they named the park after here. So yeah, and it created kind of this community space. Now Zapata Park has gone through, again, a lot of changes. This whole neighborhood has. And so when it first, I was named that in like the 1980s. In the 1980s, and then especially in the 1990s, there's somewhat of a famous person who lived in Alkali Flat, also ran a business, let's say, out of Tapata Park. His name was Jackson. Unfortunately, his business that he used was a distribution center for his drug empire. He was a multi-million-dollar meth. He was a drug king, and it took a lot of on the Sac PD to get this guy to figure out how to pin him with some of these charges, because he was a very violent person. And, like, his reputation was really bad, and deservedly so. He definitely ruled fear, and his children, and a lot of his runners, like that. And so he just had a lot of power in this area, and unfortunately this was kind of the area he did that in, especially in the 1990s. But it took citizens, it took individual citizens who just up to him, who decided not to be ruled by fear like that, before the charge that stuck, essentially, because nobody wanted to talk about him. But it took brave citizens to stand up and get him for some of these charges. So he was actually arrested in 2002, and then he was charged in 2004. I wrote down what he ended up getting. He got 5 life terms plus 240 years in prison for his crime. So he should do it. He should be in prison for the rest of his life, as 5 life terms plus 240. And it's all because of associations, just like people who live in this community care, want to make the community the best that they can. So after his sort of reign and doubling down of redevelopment efforts in this area, from the city and from just different sources, and especially the neighborhood association, Alkali Flat had a renewal of sorts, I think you could say, when a lot of these other buildings were built new. And it still, though, has this diversity in the neighborhood of industry, but also neighborhood, and of like buildings and also homes. And so I think that it's like such a complex neighborhood that's totally worth the walk through. Now, I'm going to end our talk today by looking at one of the houses over here. Whoops. This house over here is very special. It is the childhood home of Mae Woolsey. Now, if you follow our museum or you've been to the museum, you probably know about Mae Woolsey. It's this beautiful home right here. Again, it's gone through a lot of changes too. Mae Woolsey, a little girl, lived in Sacramento in 1860s, 1870s, and she died prematurely. She died when she was 12 years old, almost 13. And her mother, just, so grief-stricken by the death of her child, ended up putting all of her belongings into a trunk. And what she did with this trunk, and this was over the course of a few years, she put this trunk into the space under the stairs in the house here. And they kind of blocked it up and they forgot about it. And this was in the 1870s. And in the 1970s, when somebody bought this house and it was in a rough shape and he needed more space for housing or to things, and he needed to, make everything again, he opened that space under the stairs and covered this time capsule, this trunk, this piece of history that Mae's mother, in her grief, hid away, but it had all of her belongings, hundreds of items of the little girl. It's this snapshot of what life was like for a little girl in Sacramento in the 1800s. Now that trunk is at our museum, and you can go to the museum and see it. So I just think this is such a beautiful story, and it's such a Sacramento story too. In her mother's life, and trying to continue with life and handle her grief in such a way that she had to put her daughter's things away, but actually she ended up immortalizing her daughter, because we now know so much about what her life was like and the things she did, and we have her sketches and everything, and we have it on display at the museum. I think it's actually just like this really incredible and beautiful thing that that happened here, and this is her house. So that's Mae Woolsey's story, and that's Alkali. So I know that was a lot of history through in kind of a short time, but that's the beauty of this neighborhood in particular. It is so this dynamic. It's just got so many different layers of history here that we need a lot more time, probably a novel, in order to fully write it and talk about the citizens who called this place home. But thank you for joining us on our Walk and Talk today on a beautiful day. Get a chance to take the time, come to Alkali Flat and check it out. But continue with our neighborhood talks, and hopefully soon. Thank you.